How dare you interrupt me? Get out!
I'm so sorry. I thought the room was vacant.
Wait, aren't you the man who works 3 jobs to support his daughter?
Yes, but how did you know that?
The silence on the 42nd floor of the Vance Industries tower didn't smell like work. It smelled of ozone, crushed ambitions, and a lemon polish that probably cost more than Marcus Bennett's weekly grocery budget. It was a heavy, pressurized silence, the kind that pressed against the eardrums and made the squeak of leather boots sound like gunshots. Marcus adjusted his utility belt, the weight of the flashlight, radio, and keys digging familiarly into his hip. It was 6:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. Below him, the city of Seattle was a grid of gridlocked headlights and rain-slicked streets, but up here, in the stratosphere of the 1%, the air was still and cool. Most of the staff had cleared out an hour ago, fleeing the glass fortress for their suburban lives. For Mark, the day was only half over. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the grit of exhaustion in his eyes. He had pulled a double shift yesterday to cover for Ramirez, and he was pulling another one today because his bank account was currently weeping over the transaction history. A sudden asthma attack for his 7-year-old daughter Lily had resulted in a visit that his silver-tier insurance had barely touched. The copay alone was enough to make him skip lunch for a month. Focus, he told himself, shaking his head. Eyes up, shoulders back. He was a ghost in this building. That was the job description. Be visible enough to deter threats, but invisible enough that the executives didn't have to acknowledge that a human being was guarding their millions. He walked the perimeter of the executive wing, checking handles that were always locked, glancing at cameras that never blinked. "Control to Bennett," the radio on his shoulder crackled, shattering the quiet. The voice belonged to Henderson, the night shift supervisor who managed from the basement monitors and enjoyed his authority a little too much. Marcus keyed the mic, his voice dropping to that low, professional rumble he had perfected during his years in the military police. "Go for Bennett. We've got a sensor trip in the CEO's suite. Zone 4 Alpha, probably just the VAT kicking on again. Maintenance has been messing with the pressure all week, but protocol says eyes on." Marcus stopped. He looked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the double mahogany doors at the very end. The CEO's suite, the sanctum sanctorum. Elena Vance. The name carried weight. At 32, she was the youngest female billionaire in the tech sector, a prodigy who had turned a small software startup into a global empire. Marcus had seen her only once from a distance, a blur of tailored Italian wool and the clicking of sharp heels, surrounded by a phalanx of nervous assistants. She was known as the Ice Queen of the Pacific Northwest, ruthless, efficient, a heart made of circuitry. "Copy that, Control," Marcus said, feeling a prickle of unease on the back of his neck. "I'm at the North Corridor. Moving to investigate now. Make it quick, Bennett. I want the log clear before the 7 p.m. system cycle." "Roger." Marcus began to walk, his pace steady but alert. The hallway lights were dimmed for the evening, casting long architectural shadows against the walls. As he approached the suite, he checked the keypad next to the massive doors. The small LED light was blinking red. Marcus frowned. If Elena Vance were inside working late, her personal security detail 2X secret, service agents who looked like they chewed gravel for breakfast would be posted outside. The hallway was empty. The detail was gone. The schedule said the suite should be vacant. Vance was supposed to be at the Whimsy charity ball downtown, receiving an award that would likely boost the company stock another 10 points. Panic spiked in Marcus's chest, sharp and cold. A break-in? Corporate espionage? If something happened to the office on his watch, he wouldn't just be fired. He'd be blacklisted. He'd lose the insurance? He'd lose the apartment? He didn't knock. Protocol for a tripped alarm in a secured zone 1 was immediate entry to neutralize a threat. There was no time for politeness. He drew his taser with his right hand, his left hand swiping his master keycard over the reader. The lock beeped, a cheerful, chirping sound that felt hideously out of place, and the heavy mechanism clanked open. Marcus shoved the door inward, stepping through the frame with his knees bent, adrenaline flooding his veins. "Security! Stay where you—" The command died in his throat. The breath left his lungs in a rush. The office was a vast expanse of floor-to-ceiling glass floating above the city skyline. It was bathed in the cool, blue light of dusk, the city lights below twinkling like inverted stars. But Marcus didn't see the view. He didn't see the million-dollar art on the walls or the sleek, monolithic oak desk. He saw Elena Vance. She wasn't sitting. She was standing in the absolute center of the room, facing the door. A garment bag lay crumpled on the floor next to her. She was clearly in the middle of a frantic change, transitioning from her boardroom armor to evening wear. Her white silk blouse was unbuttoned, pulled wide open. Her skirt was unzipped, sliding dangerously low on her hips. She was clad in delicate, lace-trimmed underthings that seemed terrifyingly fragile against the backdrop of steel and glass. Her hands were frozen at her chest, clutching the fabric of a tuxedo shirt she had been attempting to put on. Her eyes met his. They were wide, enormous, and filled with a sheer, unadulterated shock that mirrored his own. For a heartbeat, time suspended. The laws of physics took a break. Marcus took in the scene, the terrified widening of her pupils, the vulnerability of a woman usually armor-plated in power, and the sheer, catastrophic awkwardness of his own position. Training kicked in where his brain failed. Marcus spun around instantly, pivoting on his heel with military precision until he was facing the doorframe, his back to the billionaire. His face burned so hot he felt like he was standing inside a furnace. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," Marcus stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "The sensor—" The alarm tripped. There was no detail outside. I thought you were an intruder." He gripped the brass door handle, his knuckles white. "I'm leaving immediately. I'm securing the door. I'll report myself to HR in the morning." He waited for the scream. He waited for the "you're fired." He waited for the security team to storm in and drag him away in cuffs. "Wait," the voice wasn't angry. It was tight, high-pitched, breathless. Marcus paused, his hand on the latch, his eyes fixed resolutely on the wood grain of the doorframe. "Ma'am? Don't open that door," she said, her voice cracked. "If you open that door, the wide-angle cameras in the hallway will see into the room. They'll see me, like this. Or they'll see you running out looking guilty and assume the worst." Marcus swallowed hard. She was right. The hallway cameras covered every inch. Okay, I'm facing the wall, Miss Vance. I'm not looking." "My eyes are closed." "I know you're not looking," she snapped, though the bite in her tone sounded less like authority and more like a defense mechanism against tears. There was a frantic rustling of silk behind him, the sound of a zipper, the sound of fabric being shoved around. "Just stay there for 10 seconds. Do not move. I'm a statue, ma'am." Marcus stared at the door, counting the seconds in his head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. He thought about the medical bill on his counter. $700. He thought about Lily's cough. He thought about the rent. "Please don't fire me. Please let this be a write-up." "Okay," she said after a moment that stretched into eternity. "Turn around." Marcus turned slowly, keeping his eyes lowered at first, checking her shoes before risking eye contact. Elena Vance was buttoned up now. She was wearing a women's tuxedo, sleek, black, and sharply tailored, with a crisp white shirt, but she looked nothing like the magazine covers. Her hair was slightly mussed. Her face, usually a mask of impossible composure, was pale and sheen with sweat. But it was her hands that caught his attention. They were trembling. Not just a little violently. She walked toward him, not stopping until she was 2 feet away. She looked up at him. Marcus was 6'2", towering over her, and searched his face with a desperate intensity. "Do you know how to tie a tie?" she asked. Marcus blinked. His brain, which had been preparing for a lawsuit, short-circuited. "Excuse me?" She gestured helplessly to a black silk bow tie sitting on the edge of her desk. My date bailed. My stylist is stuck in gridlock on I-5. I have to be at the Whimsy Ball in 20 minutes to accept the Innovator of the Year award." Her voice rose in pitch, faster and faster. "The board is there. The investors are there. If I don't show up, the stock drops. If I show up looking disheveled, they'll say I'm unstable. They're already looking for a reason to oust me because of the merger rumors. And my hands," she held them up. They were shaking so badly she couldn't have held a pen, let alone manipulated slippery silk. "I can't do it," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. She leaned back against her heavy desk, her shoulders slumping. "I don't need a security guard right now. I need a dad. You look like a dad? Are you a dad? Marcus stood there, the absurdity of the situation washing over him. The most powerful woman in Seattle wasn't firing him for a breach of privacy. She was asking for wardrobe assistance because she was on the verge of a panic attack. His posture relaxed. The rigid soldier vanished, replaced by the man who spent his evenings making mac and cheese and checking homework. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said softly. I have a daughter, Lily. She's 7. Elena let out a ragged, humorless laugh, pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes. God, 7, that sounds nice, simple. She dropped her hands and looked at him, her eyes glassy. Can you help me? Please. Marcus looked at the bow tie, then at her. He saw the terror behind her eyes. It was the same look Lily had when thunder shook the apartment walls. It was the universal look of someone who had carried the world for too long and was about to buckle. I can help, Marcus said. He stepped forward, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, telegraphing every action so as not to startle her. He picked up the bow tie from the desk. The silk was cool and smooth, vastly more expensive than the clip-ons he'd worn to prom. May I? He asked, holding the tie up. She nodded, lifting her chin, exposing the long, elegant line of her throat. She smelled of expensive vanilla and fear. Marcus's large, rough hands moved with surprising dexterity. He tied 1,000,000 shoelaces, braided pigtails, and fixed tiny doll clothes. This required the same gentle patience. He draped the silk around her neck, measuring the ends. Deep breath, Miss Vance, he murmured, his voice a low rumble in the quiet office. In through the nose, out through the mouth, she inhaled sharply, her chest rising against the stiff shirt. I'm not usually like this, she whispered, staring at the knot of his uniform tie. I'm usually in control. I build systems. I control variables. Nobody controls all the variables, Marcus said, crossing the fabric over. My daughter thinks I'm Superman because I can open the pickle jar. But usually I'm just trying to figure out how to make spaghetti without burning the house down. Elena cracked a small, fragile smile. It transformed her face, making her look younger, softer. Does she think you're Superman? Yeah, I haven't told her yet that I'm just Clark Kent on a budget. He looped the fabric, forming the bow. He could feel her pulse hammering in her neck, but as he worked, it began to slow. Hold this loop for me? Just here. She placed a trembling finger on the knot. Her skin was cold. You're very calm, she noted. Panic is contagious, ma'am. Calm is too. I prefer to spread the latter. He pulled the ends tight, adjusting the wings of the tie until they were perfectly symmetrical. He smoothed the collar of her shirt down over the band. There, Marcus said, stepping back. Perfect. Elena turned to the large mirror on the wall. She straightened her jacket. She smoothed her hair. She stared at her reflection, and Marcus watched the transformation happen in real time. The trembling stopped. The chin lifted. The eyes hardened, not into ice, but into diamond, sharp, unbreakable. She put the armor back on. But when she looked at Marcus's reflection standing behind her, the diamond softened just a fraction. What's your name? She asked. Bennett. Marcus Bennett. Well, Marcus Bennett, she turned to face him. The desperation was gone, replaced by a quiet, intense gratitude. You just saved my night. Maybe my career? Just doing my job, ma'am. No, she shook her head. Your job was to tase me or call the police. You did something else. She paused, checking her watch. I have to go. The car is downstairs. She walked to the door, her stride confident again, the click of her heels returning to their rhythmic power. But at the threshold she stopped. Bennett? Yes, Miss Vance. Walk me to my car? She asked, not looking back. I don't want to face the sharks alone just yet. Marcus smiled, a small, genuine thing. He touched his earpiece. Control, this is Bennett, Sector 4 Alpha Secure. Escorting the CEO to transport. Copy, Bennett. Henderson's voice crackled back, sounding bored. About time. Marcus held the door open. After you, ma'am. As they walked down the long, silent corridor, Marcus didn't feel like a ghost anymore. And for the first time in a long time, the silence of the glass tower didn't feel heavy. It felt like the quiet before a different kind of storm. The 2 weeks following the incident in the glass tower were not measured in hours, but in heartbeats. For Marcus Bennett, the Vance Industries building had transformed. It was no longer just a structure of steel and concrete that he patrolled in 8-hour shifts. It was a loaded weapon pointed at his livelihood. Every time his radio crackled with static, he flinched, expecting the summons to human resources. Every time a black SUV pulled up to the curb, he expected a termination notice to be handed out the window. He walked the perimeter with the ghost of that evening haunting him, the image of the most powerful woman in Seattle unraveling in front of him, and the terrifying intimacy of tying a bow tie around her neck. He had seen the wizard behind the curtain, and usually the wizard didn't like witnesses. "Bennett, you're drifting," Henderson snapped one rainy Tuesday. The shift supervisor was a man who wore his uniform 2 sizes too small, as if tightening the fabric increased his authority. He stood by the main console, tapping a stylus against the screen. "Sector 3 patrol is 4 minutes behind schedule. Stop staring at the elevators." "Copy," Marcus said, his jaw tightening. Moving. He forced his legs to move, but his mind was elsewhere. Specifically, it was 3 miles away at a CVS pharmacy counter. Earlier that afternoon, before his shift, he had gone to pick up Lily's maintenance inhaler. The pharmacist, a kind woman who knew him by name, had given him a sympathetic wince as she rang it up. "Insurance rejected the brand name again, Mark. The generic is on backorder until Thursday. It's $400 out of pocket if you want it today." $400. That was groceries for 3 weeks. That was the electricity bill and a half. He had walked out with the expensive inhaler because Lily's chest had been tight that morning, and he wasn't going to gamble with her breathing. But now, walking the polished marble of the lobby, he could physically feel the lightness of his bank account. It was a hollowness in his gut that no amount of cafeteria coffee could fill. He needed this job. He needed the overtime. And he was 90% sure he was about to lose it. The dynamic of the building had shifted in subtle, tectonic ways. Elena Vance was a creature of habit. Every morning at 8:15 a.m., she entered through the private executive garage. Every evening at 6 p.m., she left. Security personnel were furniture to her, necessary, functional, and ignored. But since that night, the pattern had glitched. On the 3rd day, Marcus was manning the front desk, covering a lunch break, when the elevator doors chimed. A hush fell over the lobby, the specific, reverent silence that occurred when the queen bee entered the hive. Elena walked out, flanked by 3 assistants and her frantic chief of operations. She was wearing a crimson trench coat, her phone pressed to her ear, barking orders about a merger in Tokyo. She looked invincible. The Ice Queen moniker was well-earned. She cut through the air like a scalpel. As she passed the security desk, her eyes swept the room. It was a predator scan checking the environment, then her gaze locked onto Marcus. He stiffened, snapping to a subtle position of attention. "Here it comes," he thought. The nod to security to have me escorted out. Elena didn't stop walking. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. But for a split second, a fraction of a moment that no one else noticed, her stride hesitated. She looked him dead in the eye, and her expression softened. It wasn't a friendly look, exactly. It was a look of recognition. It was a silent acknowledgement shared between 2 people who knew a secret. She gave him a curt, almost imperceptible nod. Then she swept through the revolving doors and into the waiting limousine. "Did she just look at you?" Ramirez whispered, leaning over the counter, his mouth half full of a bagel. "No," Marcus said, staring at the spinning glass door. "She was looking at the exit. Man, she looked right at you." "That was weird." "She usually looks through us like we're made of cellophane." Marcus didn't answer. He just felt the sweat prickle under his collar. The nod was worse than being ignored. The nod meant she remembered. The nod meant he was on her radar. The summons came 10 days later on a Friday. It was the end of the shift. Marcus was in the locker room, unlacing his boots. His feet throbbed. He was mentally calculating how much pasta he had left in the pantry and whether he could stretch it through the weekend. The metal door banged open. Henderson stood there, holding a clipboard, a smirk playing on his lips. "Bennett?" Marcus didn't look up. "Yeah, boss?" "Leave the uniform. Keep your badge, but leave the belt." Henderson's voice dripped with false sympathy. "You're wanted on the 42nd floor. Administrative suite." The locker room went quiet. 2 other guards stopped changing and looked over. Being called to the 42nd floor was never good. It was where careers went to die. Marcus felt a cold stone drop into his stomach. He had expected it, but the reality was a physical blow. He slowly stood up, closing his locker. "What's the tag?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice steady. "Disciplinary?" "They didn't say," Henderson shrugged, clearly enjoying the mystery. "But when the CEO's executive assistant calls down personally? It ain't to wish you a happy birthday. Good luck, pal. Hope you updated that resume." Marcus nodded once. He finished unlacing his boots, changed into his street clothes, a pair of worn jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days, and walked out. The elevator ride up was the longest of his life. He watched the numbers climb. 10, 20, 30. He thought about Lily. He thought about the school field trip fee due on Monday. He thought about how hard it was to find security work in the city without a reference. "I'll beg," he decided, "if I have to. I'll ask to be reassigned to the warehouse night watch. I'll take a pay cut. I just can't lose the insurance." The doors dinged open on 42. The reception area was sleek, modern, and intimidating. A young woman with glasses sat behind a desk that looked like a piece of abstract art. "Marcus Bennett?" she asked without looking up. "Yes, ma'am. Go right in." "She's expecting you." "She?" Marcus frowned. Usually, firings were handled by the HR director, a man named Mr. Golson who smelled of peppermint and despair. "Miss Vance," the assistant said, finally looking up. "Go on, the door is open." Marcus walked to the double mahogany doors, the same ones he had burst through 2 weeks ago. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the wood. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and knocked. "Enter." He pushed the door open. The office was exactly as he remembered it, minus the chaos. The sunset was painting the room in hues of violet and gold. Elena Vance sat behind her massive oak desk. She wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a half-buttoned shirt today. She was clad in a sharp, navy blue power suit that looked like it could deflect bullets. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless bun. She was typing on a laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. She didn't look up immediately. Marcus stood awkwardly in the center of the room, holding his baseball cap in his hands. He felt underdressed, underpaid, and overwhelmed. "Close the door, Marcus," she said, her eyes still on the screen. He turned and clicked the door shut. The silence returned, that expensive, ozone-scented silence. "Sit," she gestured to one of the low, leather chairs opposite her desk. Marcus sat. The leather was soft, swallowing him up. He sat on the edge, his posture rigid, knees together. Finally, Elena stopped typing. She closed the laptop with a decisive snap. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at him. "How is Lily?" The question threw him off balance. He had prepared defenses for, "Why did you enter without clearance?" Or, "Why shouldn't we fire you?" He hadn't prepared for small talk. She's okay," Marcus said, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat. "Recovering from a cold. The weather changes trigger her asthma." "I see." Elena picked up a manila folder lying on her desk. She opened it. "I've been reading about you, Marcus." Marcus gripped his hat tighter. "Miss Vance, about that night, I followed protocol. The sensor tripped, I had to clear the room. If I had known—" "Stop," she said. She wasn't angry. She sounded bored with his apology. "I'm not talking about the incident log. I'm talking about your file." She glanced down at the papers. Marcus James Bennett. 36 years old, 5 years in the military police. Honorable discharge. Commendation for de-escalation tactics during a riot in Frankfurt. You speak decent German and passable Spanish. You've been with Vance Industries Security for 3 years. Perfect attendance record. 0 disciplinary actions. 0 complaints. She looked up. And, according to my payroll data, you are currently picking up an average of 20 hours of overtime a week. Marcus felt his face heat up. "I have expenses, ma'am." "I do the work." "You do the work of 2 men, she corrected. "And you're currently working the lobby desk, which is a waste of a tactical skill set." Marcus stayed silent. He didn't know where this was going, but he sensed a trap. Elena leaned back in her chair. The Ice Queen mask slipped just a fraction, revealing the woman he had met on the night of the gala. My head of personal security, a man named Miller, submitted his resignation this morning, she said. His wife is sick. He wants to move to Florida. Marcus nodded slowly. I'm sorry to hear that. Miller is a good man. He's loyal. And in my position, loyalty is the most expensive commodity in the world. It's harder to find than lithium. She tapped her finger on the file. I need a replacement. Someone to shadow me, travel with me, manage the detail. Handle the threats that don't make the news. Marcus blinked. Okay, I'm sure there are plenty of private contractors who... I don't want a contractor, she interrupted sharply. Contractors are mercenaries. They work for the check. I need someone internal, someone I trust. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. Do you know what happened after I left the office that night, Marcus? No, ma'am. I went to the gala. I walked the red carpet. I shook hands with 50 people who smiled to my face and bet against my stock behind my back. I accepted my award. And the whole time, I was thinking about one thing. She turned to face him, her silhouette framed by the city lights. I was thinking that you were the only person in the last 5 years who saw me completely vulnerable, half-naked, panic-stricken, falling apart, and didn't try to take anything from me. The room went very quiet. You didn't take a photo, she said, walking closer. You didn't sell the story to TMZ. You could have made $50,000 with one phone call. God knows you need the money. Marcus stiffened. I'm not that kind of person. I know, she said softly. That's the point. You didn't leer, you didn't judge, you turned your back. You helped me tie a tie. You treated me like a human being, not an ATM or a target. She stopped in front of him, leaning against the edge of her desk, crossing her arms. I'm offering you the job, Marcus. Head of personal security. Marcus stared at her. His brain was trying to catch up with the reality of the moment. Miss Vance, with all due respect, I'm a lobby guard. I check badges. I haven't done close protection detail since the army. Skills come back. Instincts don't. You have the instincts. She slid a piece of paper across the desk toward him. This is the contract. Marcus hesitated, then reached out and took the paper. His eyes scanned the numbers. He stopped. He blinked and looked again. Is this a typo? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. No, Elena said. It's a starting salary of $180,000 a year. Plus bonuses. Marcus felt the blood drain from his head. That was triple what he made now. Triple. It was life-changing. It was buy a house money. But there's a caveat, Elena continued, her voice turning businesslike again. The hours are brutal. I work 80 hours a week, so you work 80 hours a week? I travel to Tokyo, London, and New York constantly. You will miss birthdays. You might miss holidays. You will be on call 24/7. Marcus looked at the paper. The number was dazzling, but the reality was heavy. I can't, he said, placing the paper back on the desk. Elena looked stunned. For the first time, her composure cracked. Excuse me? I can't take the job, Marcus said, his voice steady but pained. I'm a single father, Ms. Vance. I don't have a nanny. I don't have family in the city. If I'm in Tokyo, who picks Lily up from school? If I'm working 80 hours a week, who helps her with her homework? Who sits with her when she can't breathe? He stood up, clutching his hat. The money... God, the money is incredible. It would solve every problem I have. But I can't solve my problems by abandoning my daughter. He looked at her, expecting anger. Expecting to be fired for rejecting the king's coin. Instead, Elena was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It looked like respect. I knew you'd say that, she said quietly. She reached into the folder again and pulled out a second sheet of paper. She slid it on top of the first one. I had legal draft and addendum, she said. I call it the Lily Clause, Marcus frowned. The what? Read it. Marcus picked up the second sheet. Employees shall be granted a rotating schedule when within the city limits, ensuring end of watch by 17:30 hours on weekdays. Company shall provide a stipend for premium, childcare, nanny services for travel periods, full coverage under the Executive Health Plan, Platinum Tier, effective immediately, covering all pre-existing conditions and specialist care. Marcus read the last line 3 times. Platinum Tier, that meant no copays. That meant the best asthma specialists in the country. That meant no more choosing between brand name inhalers and electricity. He looked up at Elena. She wasn't looking at him with the cold calculation of a CEO anymore. She was looking at him with a tentative hope. You said you needed a dad that night, Elena said softly. I don't want you to stop being one. That's what makes you good at this. You protect what matters. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat, thick and hard. He looked at the contract, then at the woman offering it. He realized then that she wasn't just buying his services. She was buying his safety so he could provide her with his. Why? Marcus asked, his voice thick. You could hire anyone, former CIA. Mossad, why go to this trouble for a lobby guard? Elena walked back around her desk and sat down. She looked small for a moment, surrounded by all that glass and sky. Because, she said, meeting his eyes, when I was standing in this room, half naked and terrified, thinking my world was ending. You didn't see a billionaire, you saw a person? And you told me to breathe. She clasped her hands. Everyone around me tells me what I want to hear, Marcus. I need someone who will tell me to breathe. And I need someone who can tie a tie. Marcus looked down at the contract one last time. He thought of the inhaler in his pocket. He thought of the bike Lily wanted. He thought of the loneliness he saw in Elena Vance's eyes. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a cheap ballpoint pen, and uncapped it. I'll need to vet the nanny personally, Marcus said, his voice regaining its strength. Elena smiled, a real smile. I'd expect nothing less. And, Marcus added, hovering the pen over the signature line, I can't be in Tokyo in October. Lily has a school play. She's a tree. It's a pivotal role, Elena laughed, a bright, surprising sound in the quiet office. I think we can work around the tree schedule. Welcome to the team, Mr. Bennett. Marcus signed his name. The ink was dark and permanent. Thank you, Miss Vance. Elena, she corrected him. When it's just us. It's Elena. Copy that, Elena. He stood up, leaving the contract on the desk. He felt lighter than he had in years. The heavy silence of the tower was gone, replaced by the hum of a future that didn't look quite so dark. Marcus? She called out as he reached the door. He turned back. Yes? You start tomorrow, 7 a.m., wear a suit. And bring a tie, she smirked. I might need a refresher lesson, Marcus smiled, put his baseball cap on and tipped the brim. I'll bring two. He walked out of the office, past the stunned assistant, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, he didn't look down at his boots. He looked up at the numbers, watching them count down, ready to go home and tell his daughter that Superman finally got a promotion. 6 months is a long time in the world of high-stakes corporate security. It is enough time to learn the rhythm of a person's life, their coffee order, black, 2 sugars, their stress ticks, twisting the silver ring on the right hand, and the precise cadence of their breathing when they are about to lie to a room full of shareholders. For Marcus Bennett, the last 6 months had been a masterclass in the duality of Elena Vance. He knew the CEO, the woman who could dismantle a hostile takeover with a single terrifyingly polite email, the woman who wore 5-inch heels like combat boots, the woman who didn't blink when cameras flashed in her face. But he also knew Elena. He knew she hummed off key to 80s pop songs when they were alone in the armored SUV. He knew she secretly hated the texture of caviar. And he knew that despite the billions in the bank, she was often the loneliest person in any room she entered. Tonight, that room was the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. The annual Winter Solstice Gala was the apex of the social calendar. It was a sea of black tuxedos, shimmering diamonds, and smiles that didn't reach the eyes. The air smelled of expensive Lillet, champagne, and desperate ambition. Marcus stood at the edge of the perimeter near a marble pillar wrapped in velvet. He wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than his car, tailored to conceal the sidearm at his waist and the communication accolades in his ear. Sector 2 is clear, the voice of his second-in-command, a sharp woman named Chun, crackled in his earpiece. Copy, Sector 2. Keep the photographers back at the rope line. They're getting aggressive, Marcus murmured into his lapel mic, his eyes never stopping their scan. His gaze wasn't looking for threats in the crowd. He had a team for that. His eyes were fixed on the target. Elena Vance stood in the center of the room, a splash of vibrant emerald green in a sea of monochrome. She looked radiant. Her gown was a structural masterpiece that hugged her figure and trailed elegantly behind her. Her hair was a cascade of gold waves. She was laughing at something the mayor was saying, her head tilted back, her hand lightly touching her throat. To the untrained eye, she was having the time of her life. To Marcus, she looked like she was drowning. He saw the tightness in the corner of her eyes. He saw the way her fingers were gripping the stem of her champagne flute so hard her knuckles were white. She was doing the Vance pivot, shifting her weight from foot to foot, a subtle sign that her energy was depleted. She was surrounded. A circle of investors, tech rivals, and politicians had closed in, trapping her in a cage of polite conversation. A man Marcus recognized as Simon Sterling, a rival CEO with a reputation for misogyny masked as charm, was leaning in too close, invading her personal space. Marcus didn't wait for a signal. He adjusted his cuffs and pushed off the pillar. He moved through the crowd with the fluid grace of a shark parting a school of fish. He didn't shove anyone, yet people instinctively moved out of his way. His presence was a tangible force. He reached the circle just as Sterling was placing a hand on Elena's arm. "Elena, darling, the merger rumors are fascinating, but we all know you don't have the stomach for a gut job like that," Sterling was saying, his voice oily. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chatter like a knife. He stepped smoothly between Sterling and Elena, his broad shoulders creating a physical wall. Sterling blinked, looking up at Marcus with annoyance. "Excuse me? We are having a conversation. Miss Vance is required for a scheduled briefing with the foreign press." Marcus lied smoothly, his face a mask of polite indifference. He turned to Elena. "Ma'am?" "We're behind schedule." Elena looked up at him. The relief that washed over her face was so raw, so instant, that Marcus felt a pang in his chest. "Oh," Elena said, playing along instantly. "Is it that time already?" "My apologies, Simon. Duty calls." "But," Sterling started. Marcus guided her away before the man could finish his sentence, his hand hovering protectively at the small of her back, without actually touching her. They moved through the crowd, cutting a path toward the service exits. "Briefing with the foreign press?" Elena whispered as they reached the edge of the ballroom. "I didn't know I had one." "You don't," Marcus murmured. "But I figured you needed an extraction." "You have no idea," she breathed. If I had to listen to him explain my own business model to me one more time, I was going to stab him with a shrimp fork. "Tactical error, ma'am." "Too much paperwork." They reached the side exit. Marcus nodded to the guard stationed there, who pushed the heavy door open. The noise of the gala, the clinking glasses, the laughter, the string quartet was instantly severed as the door clicked shut behind them. They were in a service corridor smelling of industrial cleaner and silence. Elena slumped against the wall, closing her eyes. The emerald gown rustled as she slid down slightly. "Status?" Marcus asked gently. "Battery at 2%, she muttered. "Systems failing." I need out. The car is at the north entrance. We can be back at the penthouse in 15 minutes. Elena opened her eyes. She looked at him, really looked at him. "I don't want to go to the penthouse. It's quiet there. It's too quiet. And I'm starving." "I haven't eaten since breakfast because I was too nervous about the speech." Marcus checked his watch. 10:45 p.m. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "If we're going off-grid, I might have a suggestion." "But you're overdressed." "I don't care," she said, pushing herself off the wall. "Does this suggestion involve carbohydrates?" "Exclusively." 20 minutes later, the scene was enough to make a tabloid photographer retire on the spot. Elena Vance, the billionaire ice queen, and her head of security were sitting on a weathered wooden bench in a small park near West 4th Street. The park was empty save for a few pigeons and the distant wail of a siren. Between them, on the bench, sat an open cardboard box from Sal's Pizzeria. Elena was holding a slice of pepperoni pizza. Grease was threatening to drip onto her $10,000 gown. She had kicked off her heels, and her bare feet were resting on the cold concrete. She took a bite, chewed, and let out a moan of pure ecstasy. "Oh my God," she said, her mouth half full. This is better than the caviar. This is better than the truffle risotto. This is better than winning the NASDAQ opening bell." Marcus chuckled, wiping tomato sauce from his thumb with a flimsy paper napkin. He had taken off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders to protect her from the night chill. He sat in his shirt sleeves, his tie loosened. "I told you," Marcus said. "Sal doesn't mess around, it's the water. Makes the dough crispy. It's heaven," she said. She took another bite, careful to lean forward so the grease missed the silk. "You know, my nutritionist would have a heart attack if he saw this. He thinks I survive on kale and air. What happens in Sector 4 stays in Sector 4, Marcus said, taking a bite of his own slice. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The city buzzed around them, taxis honking, the rumble of the subway beneath the grate, but in this little pocket of the park, it felt private. It was a strange intimacy. They had spent hundreds of hours together over the last 6 months, but always with a barrier, the barrier of the car partition. The barrier of the schedule, the barrier of Ma'am and Bennett. Tonight the barriers felt thin. "Marcus?" He looked over. "Yeah?" She was looking down at her bare feet, her expression contemplative. The street lamp cast a warm orange glow on her face, softening the sharp angles of her makeup. "That night," she started, her voice quiet, "the first night. In the office," Marcus tensed slightly. They never talked about the night he walked in on her. It was the elephant in the room that they had politely agreed to ignore. "You don't have to bring that up, Elena." "I do," she said. "I never told you what I was actually thinking when you walked through that door." Marcus set his pizza crust down in the box. He turned his body toward her, giving her his full attention. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that I was entirely alone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was standing there, surrounded by millions of dollars of glass and art, realizing that if I fell apart, there was no one to catch me. I have hundreds of employees, I have a board of directors. I have millions of followers on Twitter. But I felt like a mannequin in a department store window. Everyone looks, everyone judges, but no one asks if the mannequin is cold." She turned to look at him. Her eyes were dark and intense. "You were the first person in a long time who looked at me and didn't see the CEO? You didn't see the billionaire? You saw a human being in trouble. And you didn't try to fix me or take a picture or ask for a job. You just helped me breathe." Marcus held her gaze. The air between them felt charged, heavier than the humidity of the night. "It's hard not to see you, Elena," Marcus said softly. "The real you. You hide it well, but it's there. Is it?" "Yeah, I see it when you ask the interns about their college exams. I see it when you call your grandmother on Sundays. I see it now, eating pizza with your shoes off." Elena looked away, a flush rising on her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. She pulled his suit jacket tighter around her shoulders. It swallowed her frame, making her look smaller, softer. "I get tired, Marcus," she whispered. "I get so tired of wearing the armor. Sometimes I just want to be be," Marcus said. "Right here for 20 minutes. Be Elena, not Vance Industries." "Just Elena." She smiled, a sad, sweet thing. "I don't know if I remember how. You're doing a pretty good job right now." She laughed, the tension breaking. She reached out and touched his arm. Her hand was warm through his dress shirt. It was a light touch, barely there, but it sent a shockwave through him. "Thank you," she said. "For the extraction, for the tie, for the job, for the pizza, anytime." She hesitated, her hand lingered on his arm. She leaned in slightly, and for a terrifying, exhilarating second, Marcus thought she might kiss him. The distance between them was negligible. He could smell her perfume vanilla and something floral mixing with the scent of the city rain. He didn't pull away. He didn't want to, but then she pulled back just an inch. The moment hung in the air, suspended, acknowledging the line they were towing, the line between boss and employee. The line between two different worlds. She cleared her throat, her hand dropping from his arm to the bench between them. "Lily has a school play next Friday, right?" she asked abruptly, changing the subject. Her voice was a little too bright, a little too fast. Marcus blinked, shaking off the trance. Yeah, next Friday. The spring pageant. The one where she's a tree?" Marcus laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest. "Yeah, she's exceedingly proud of her branches. We've been practicing her rustling in the wind technique for weeks. She's a very dedicated actress," Elena said with a smile. Then she looked down at her hands. "Do you think, would it be weird if I came?" Marcus froze. You want to come to a second-grade play at a public school in Queens? I've never seen a school play, Elena said, sounding unsure for the first time that night. I was homeschooled tutors, we didn't do plays. And I bought her a break-a-leg gift. I had my assistant track down a vintage Triceratops plushie. The one she mentioned last time she came to the office. Marcus stared at her. He felt a lump form in his throat, thick and hard. He thought about the stark difference between his life and hers. He thought about the peeling paint in the school auditorium and the folding metal chairs. And then he looked at this woman, powerful, brilliant, and terrifyingly kind, who remembered that his daughter liked dinosaurs. He realized then that the accident in the office 6 months ago hadn't been an accident at all. It had been fate kicking the door down. She'd love that, Marcus said, his voice husky with emotion. She'd really love that. She asks about you all the time? She calls you the pretty lady boss. Elena laughed, covering her face with her hands. Oh God, please don't tell the board that. Your secret is safe with me. So it's a date? She asked, then her eyes widened as she realized what she said. I mean, an appointment, a scheduled event. For the calendar, Marcus smiled. A genuine, wide grin that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. He decided not to let her retreat. It's a date, Elena. The use of her name, without the correction, hung in the air. And afterwards? Elena asked, holding his gaze, her boldness returning. Maybe spaghetti? You mentioned once you make spaghetti, if you promise not to burn the house down. I think I can manage that, Marcus said. My sauce is legendary. Even better than Sal's. That is a bold claim, Mr. Bennett. I back it up. Elena Vance, the woman who commanded billions, smiled back at him. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was acting. She didn't feel like a mannequin. She felt real. Copy that, she whispered. A raindrop fell, then another. The sky was opening up. We should go, Marcus said, standing up and offering her his hand. Before the gown gets ruined. Elena looked at his hand, large, scarred, and steady. She took it. He pulled her up, and for a moment they stood close again, the rain beginning to mist around them. The gown is insured, she said softly, not letting go of his hand. But you're right. We have an early morning. I'll pull the car around. Marcus? Yeah? I'm glad you walked through that door, she said. Me too, Elena, me too. As they walked out of the park and toward the waiting black SUV, the city lights blurred in the rain. Marcus opened the door for her, shielding her head with his hand. As she slid into the leather seat, she looked back at him one last time, a secret smile playing on her lips. Marcus closed the door, the solid thud sealing the promise of next Friday. He walked around to the driver's side, ignoring the rain soaking his shirt. He didn't feel the cold. He realized that sometimes the best things in life happen when you accidentally walk through the wrong door. And sometimes the person you're paid to protect ends up saving you right back. He started the engine, checked the mirrors, and pulled out into the traffic. Home, Miss Vance? Home, Marcus. And for the first time, the word home didn't just mean a penthouse in the sky. It felt like something they were building, one pizza slice and one school play at a time.